Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me for this talk. I'm going to be reviewing the prehistoric rock art in Edinburgh, Lothians and the Borders in the light of the work that's been done by the Scotland's Rock Art Project. This is a 5-year programme which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and it started last year, it started 2017 and it's finishing next year. It's hosted by Historic Environment Scotland, where I'm based along with my teammates Joanna and Linda, and we're also working in partnership with Edinburgh University and Glasgow School of Art. So in this talk I'm going to first of all give you a bit of background about Scotland's rock art in general and what the project is doing, and then I'll focus for the rest of the talk on the rock art of Edinburgh, Lothians and the Borders. So a lot of you might be familiar already with rock art. You might know it as cup markings or cup and ring markings. It's abstract motifs based on things like cups, which are circular depressions cut into the rock, and rings, one or more concentric rings around those cups, as well as grooves, which are carved onto boulders and outcrops in the open landscape. These are quite simple devices, these motifs, but they can be put together. There are many subtle variations on them. There are over 200 variations on these basic motifs and their behaviour in relation to the natural rock surface. So it's far more complex than it looks, and they can range from one single cut mark on a rock to a very elaborate and complex combination of motifs which can cover the entire rock surface. It was originally thought to have been a Bronze Age phenomenon, but now with better dating techniques, we know that it was created predominantly during the Neolithic and into the early Bronze Age, so possibly from around 4000 BC but to around 2000 BC. Although the vast majority of rock art's found in the open landscape on natural rock surfaces, a small proportion of it is used and reused in prehistoric monuments, particularly from the late Neolithic and Bronze Age, such as standing stones, stone circles and burial structures. And it's been extensively quarried and reused and removed, relocated in the landscape. And we find it frequently in more recent historical contexts, such as stone dikes in the landscape, but also things like field clearance, cairns and so on. Scotland's rock art is part of a much wider prehistoric carving tradition known in other parts of particularly Western Atlantic Europe, in England, in Ireland and northwestern Spain, as well as Portugal. So because of this kind of wider spread, it's often also termed Atlantic rock art. The antiquity of rock art was first recognised really in the early 19th century, and since then the numbers of recorded rock art sites has grown steadily over the last 200 years. So when we started the project in January 2017, what we did was compiled all the records that are in Canmore, as well as the records in the historic environment records, regional historic environment records, and we pulled all those together into a single database, our SCRAP database, SCRAP standing for Scotland's Rock Art Project. So at the start of the project, we had around 2,775 records. Now, nearly 4 years later, we have 3,150 records in our database, and that number is growing all the time through fieldwork. And you can see from the two maps, the distribution map and the density map shown here, that it's not an even spread across Scotland. We have areas of very high concentrations, particularly in Perthshire around Loch Tay, as well as Mid-Argyll in the Kilmartin region and in Dumfries and Galloway. And there are also other large areas of Scotland that appear to have very little or no rock art at all, particularly such as northwestern Scotland and parts of the Central Highlands. But this map is probably quite misleading. The distribution may not be the same now as it was many thousands of years ago. What remains today is probably only a tiny fraction of the original volume of rock art, possibly only 5 to 10% of what was once there. So it would have been a huge amount of rock art in the landscape. It would have been a very important, very significant part of the prehistoric landscape. And of course, the question that everybody wants to know is, what does it all mean? There are many challenges to understanding and interpreting prehistoric rock art, and the simple answer is that we don't have we don't have a good understanding of its meaning. But there are many theories about what it might mean, and famously Ronald Morris, who was a Scottish lawyer who did a lot of work recording, finding and recording rock art in Scotland in the 60s, 70s and 80s, pulled together 104 theories about what rock art might mean, and he put them into a list which was graded according to credibility. So some of these theories are more credible, such as the three at the top, and the others are less credible and sometimes downright bonkers as well. So the three at the bottom are perhaps some of the less credible theories. However, rock art remains understudied and undervalued. There's a huge need for research in this area, and one of the problems that has really kind of faced rock art research is the reliability of the data. And although we have, a good record, a fantastic record in Canmore and the HERs, this record is being compiled by many different people over 200 years, people using different techniques with different agendas and perspectives. And so the records are very inconsistent in the level of detail that they offer, and there are frequently inaccuracies in that data. Also, rock art is a very visual medium, and we need to have an understanding of what there is, looking at images and so on. But only 6% of records currently have publicly accessible digital images, and there are no publicly accessible 3D models in Canmore. So this inconsistency in the data has a huge constraint on research into this area. So this is why one of the reasons why we started Scotland's Rock Art Project. We've been working with communities to record research and raise awareness of rock art across the country in order to enhance understanding and appreciation of it. In the first 2 years of the project, we trained 11 community teams to survey and record rock art across the country. And you can see from the map that we have a local team, the Edinburgh, Lothians and Fife team, or ELF team. And you can see some images of the ELFs at work on the right-hand side of the screen. So we're hugely grateful to all our community teams, the ELF team and all the other community teams, for the immense effort and contribution they've been doing in all weathers, going out and recording rock art. And what we and our community teams do to collect data is we use a standardized methodology which collects detailed information on the motifs, their location in the landscape, the type of rock that they're carved on, and its orientation, its aspect, and so on, as well as the landscape context and the archaeological context in which those rocks are placed. And we use different methods, a recording form, conventional photography, sketches, and 3D modelling to capture that data. The data is then uploaded to our website using a digital form, and we validate it, and it becomes then publicly accessible. So anybody and everybody can access that information, look at the images and the sketches, and at the interactive 3D models. There are huge benefits for 3D modelling for rock art, for the recording. First of all, it's not intrusive, it doesn't impact on the rock. It's user-friendly and needs minimal equipment. And for this kind of project where we're covering a huge area and lots of people are involved, it's ideal because it provides consistent data. So everybody captures the same amount of the same degree, the same accuracy of data. There's no subjectivity involved. And we capture detailed information. So you can see perhaps by comparing the two images at the bottom of the screen, on the right is a drawing from the Royal Commission of a rock, the Braes of Balloch in Perthshire, and on the left is a screenshot of the 3D model of the same rock that we did earlier this year. And you can see immediately that there's a different level of detail and precision in the image on the left. And 3D modelling is also fantastic for rock art research and analysis because it allows us access to an unprecedented level of detail and information. And we can look at things like superimpositions of carvings. The top left-hand image, you can perhaps see some cup and rings, some faint cup and rings lying beneath the large cup and ring motif in the centre of that image. We can also look at the carving techniques, so the relationship between the motifs and the rock surface, and obviously the detail of the motifs themselves. So thus far in the project, almost 4 years in, we've made about 200 new discoveries. We've recorded about 1,350 carved stones or panels with our community teams, and there are over 900 3D models of rock art now publicly accessible. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to focus now on rock art in Edinburgh, Lothians and Borders. At the start of the project in 2017, we had 51 records in our database, and you can see those in the red dots on the map on the left. And this stage in the project, kind of almost 4 years in, we now have 85 records in the database, of which we have investigated and recorded 46. So those additional records, those 34 additional records, have come from various sources. First of all, splitting up records that originally contained more than one carved rock in them. So, for example, in Canmore, a record might be detailing more 2 or 3 carved rocks, and we split those up into individual carved rocks. Also reclassifying information. When we started the project, we pulled out all the data that was classified as rock art from Canmore and the HERs, but there are quite a lot of records that are not classified as rock art and yet contain rock art. So monuments such as standing stones and burials, things like the Key Stane in Edinburgh, which is classified as a standing stone but has rock art on it, was hidden from us. So with considerable help from colleagues in Hess, we've been able to mine into that buried data and extract all the additional records that include rock art but aren't classified as rock art. And also, of course, the new discoveries that have occurred over the last year or two. So if we look in more detail at those 85 records that are currently in our database, we can see from this rather garish pie chart that only less than a third of those are actually still in the landscape. Others, a considerable portion, are in museum collections. Some have been lost and destroyed. Others are not actually rock art, and I'll talk about all these shortly. And of the ones that remain in the landscape, almost half have been moved from their original locations. So only, as far as we know, 11 carved rocks remain in their original location. There's also a small proportion that we haven't been able to locate and record. For example, one that we know of, which is buried beneath a tennis court, but obviously we can't get to record in detail. So about 20% of the rock art in Edinburgh, Lothians and Borders is not rock art, but is natural features. And this is fairly consistent with what we're finding across the rest of Scotland. There are often natural geological features which are cup-shaped and can be very confusing and have often been recorded as rock art. Interestingly, quite a lot of these are on standing stones in this region, in this area, and it's possible that these stones were selected deliberately because of these cup-shaped features on them, which may have been perceived as significant in the past. So we need to be aware of this, but we're not classifying these as rock art because they are definitely natural. Around 15% of the rock art in Edinburgh Lothians borders has been recorded or lost and destroyed. And we have, in some cases, we have images of these rocks, which give us a kind of tantalizing glimpse of what we might be missing. For example, this wonderful witch's stone from Ratho, which has an unusual alignment of cup marks down it. And this has been in folklore, has been associated with fertility rites and so on until it was blown up in the 1930s. Traprain law, there are very odd, unusual linear carvings, and in this case a cast was actually made of the carvings before the rock was blown up for quarrying in the early 20th century. So in reality, this is probably only a tiny proportion of what's been lost over the millennia. Obviously, this is an area, particularly Edinburgh and the Lothians, which has been intensively cleared for arable farming and for urban and infrastructure developments. So, you know, it's likely that a vast amount is now missing. Possibly, you know, over 90% is missing from this area. Luckily, though, a proportion of the rock art has been preserved in museums, in museum collections, and this has been donated since the late 19th century up to recent times. In March this year, we started a programme of recording the rock art in the National Museum of Scotland Collection Centre in Granton in Edinburgh, and working in collaboration with Hugo Anderson Weimark, the curator of prehistory at the NMS, and his colleagues. So we and some members of some of our community teams recorded the rock art, and Hugo did the 3D modelling, and these models are now on the National Museum of Scotland website. So they include just a couple of examples. This lovely stone at the top from the Braid Hills, which was recovered from the Braid Hills golf course in 1897 and donated to the National Museum of Scotland. And this panel at the bottom, which was found lying face down at the edge of an arable field in East Linton, and in 1996, and it was claimed as treasure trove and then allocated to the National Museum of Scotland. Interestingly, with this rock, you can see perhaps along the top edge that some of the motifs are cut through. So the rock had been broken before being moved, or possibly after being moved, and possibly to make it more easy to move. So it may be that there are fragments of the larger carved rock remaining, some is still in the same place. Probably worth going and having a look if you're in that area. So of the, sorry, I should say also our recording programme at the museum has been halted due to COVID, so hopefully we'll be able to resume next year at some point. So only about a third of the rock art remains in the landscape, and as I said, almost half of this has been moved from its original locations. There's a lovely cup and ring marked stone, for example, which is kept in captivity just on the edge, at the edge of the parish church in Glencorse, and this is recorded as having been moved from a nearby hill where it was originally found alongside another cup and ring marked stone, which is now lost. At Crosswood, above Crosswood Reservoir in West Lothian, there's a field clearance cairn, the picture on the bottom left, and in this clearance cairn are 3 carved rocks. One of them, the one that you can see on the bottom right, has some very elaborate carvings on it. Very difficult to see in the field, but with the 3D model, we can see that it has 2 lovely spirals and a carved ring. Very unusual motifs, these, and you can see that the map at the top shows the location of spiral motifs that we know of in Scotland. There are very few, and the majority of these are concentrated in Dumfries and Galloway, so it's very unusual to find these motifs here. And this stone also appears to have been deliberately shaped. If you can possibly make out along the bottom of the stone, there's a groove following the edge of the rock, the edge of the stone, and also some sort of almost like crenellations along the edge, where it appears to have been deliberately quarried and chipped along that edge. And it's possible that this had been shaped in prehistory for use in a burial monument such as Bronze Age burial cairn, and that was then obviously its original context has been destroyed when the field was cleared. So of the rock art that actually remains in situ in its original location in the landscape, we only have 11 carved rocks, and 8 of these come from the same location at Tormain Hill in Ratho in Mid Lothian. These were originally lumped together under a single record in Canmore, and our ELF team did a fantastic job recording all these individual 8 carved rocks and creating 8 separate records from them. And they range from just one cut mark to rather complex and elaborate and unusual motifs that you can perhaps see on the picture on the right. So because there is so little rock art in the landscape remaining, any new discoveries in this region are very significant. And as I said earlier, there have been 3 very exciting new discoveries in the last year. We've also had reports in the last week of another cup and ring marked rock in southern borders, which we've not yet had time to go and visit and verify. I'll just show you 2 of these new discoveries. The first is from Lymphoi in Belerno in Mid Lothian, and this was found last December by a member of the public. There are actually 2, possibly 3 carved rocks in this area. This one I'm showing you here is the most elaborate, and you can see that as well as the cup and ring markings, there's a single ring with no cut mark in the centre. This is quite an unusual motif as well, although there appear to be quite a lot of rings without cups in Edinburgh, Lothians and Borders region. The stone lies on a public path in an area which is frequently walked over by people all the time, and it's absolutely amazing that nobody has spotted it before, but also it means that it's a very vulnerable rock. And the second discovery that I wanted to talk about was made in May this year near Garvold by a local resident, Douglas Ledingham. And this is a fantastic rock. It lies, as you can see, on the edge of a farm track and also on the edge of some recently felled woodland. And Doug just happened to be passing down this track after the woodland had been felled and spotted this rock, reported it to Stephanie Leith, who notified me, and as soon as I had the opportunity, when lockdown restrictions were eased, I went out and had a look, and it is an absolutely wonderful rock. It's just a superb find, and it's covered in cut marks and cup and ring carvings, many of which are interconnected with grooves. And you can perhaps see what's so fascinating about this rock is that the individual tool marks, the peck marks made by bashing the rock to make the motifs, are still very clear and visible. So we know that the rock was moved from higher up the hillside, where incidentally there just happened to be some possible prehistoric earthworks and enclosures. So we were very pleased that Doug Ledingham subsequently joined our ELF team and went on to find another lovely cup and ring marked stone on Sutra Hill. And both the Whitelaw Hill stone and the Sutra stone are now being considered for treasure trove. So their futures are uncertain at the moment, but we hope that they will become publicly accessible at some point in the future. So it's very reassuring to know that fabulous rock art like this still survives in the landscape, particularly in an area that's been intensively farmed and developed over the millennia. So I would urge everybody to please keep your eyes open, look everywhere, leave no stone unturned, and let us know if you do find anything out there in the landscape. So just to sum up, because I'm aware that I'm rapidly overrunning my time, what is our review of rock art so far in this region revealed? We've, first of all, in terms of the distribution, we're seeing a sort of change in the distribution patterns. We've added in some carved rocks, we've taken some out, and we're perhaps seeing more of a concentration along the kind of northern part of this region, with fewer rocks now recorded in the Lammermuirs and so on. So as we do more fieldwork, this distribution pattern will continue to change. We haven't done much work yet in the borders, and hope to do that, once we're allowed out again. We've also seen in this area that we've got very high level of motif variability, considering what a relatively small sample size this is. We're seeing a great diversity and range in the types of motifs, including some very rare ones, such as rings without cups and spirals. So this could indicate that this is a very dynamic area with a high level of connectivity and a lot of sharing of ideas and knowledge in the past. But I must stress this is very much a work in progress. We have more field work to do, and we're now in the process of doing a detailed kind of multi-scalar analysis of rock art from this region and across Scotland, looking at the motifs, the relationship with the rock surface, the type of rock that's selected, where it is in the landscape and so on, as well as the natural and the cultural landscape contexts. So this will enable us to get a better idea, a better understanding of the character and the connectivity of Edinburgh, Lothians and Borders rock art and its relationship to the rest of Scotland, and also more widely with Atlantic Europe. So it just remains to say thank you very much to my wonderful team, to our ELF team for their fantastic work, and of course all our other community teams across Scotland. And thank you to Stephanie Leith and to the conference organisers, and thank you for listening, and sorry for overrunning a bit.